Hi folks, welcome to the weekend. And if you're in the US, I trust you had a wonderful Independence Day yesterday. You're welcome for that, by the way. We here in the UK had a momentous day too. It was a general election, and let's just say that politically speaking, the Conservative incumbents were dumped unceremoniously from a moving vehicle, discarded emphatically by the nation after 14 years of variable quality. But enough of that, we have more interesting things to discuss. Let's take a look at what I've been reading this week. I finished A Deepness in the Sky last weekend. This is set in the same zones of thought universe as A Fire Upon the Deep, which I read last year and really loved. I will say that having read Deepness in the Sky, it's almost entirely unconnected to A Fire Upon the Deep. And the zones aren't even mentioned because the humans and other species in this book are as yet unaware that they even exist. All of their time is spent in the slow zone. The only real connection is the protagonist, Pham, who appears in much altered form in A Fire Upon the Deep, which is set 30,000 years later. Truly, it can be considered as a standalone novel. I really enjoy Vernor Vinge's writing style. It's very manageable and straightforward. There's nothing too tricksy about it. He just tells the story. In this book, there are two separate human groups that converge on the so-called on-off star, which goes through a decades-long cycle of burning bright and then fading to dimness, which you would have thought would prove to be challenging conditions in which to evolve an intelligent species. But you'd be wrong. On the human side of the story, the Cheng Ho are an interstellar trading house, and they nurture customer civilizations to provide trading and refit opportunities, whilst the Emergent are an autocratic faction bent on galactic expansion. Meanwhile, on Sol planet orbiting this on-off star, we're introduced to the spider civilization, the indigenous sapient species. The human factions are quickly at loggerheads and fight each other to a standstill early in the book, leaving both remnants stranded in the system. The bulk of the story then follows the humans as they're forced to collaborate to survive the decades they must wait before the spiders are advanced enough to refit their broken starships. And the progress of that civilization is another thread in the story. I probably preferred A Fire Upon the Deep, but I really did like this book. I enjoyed the world building on the spider planet, which we experienced through human spyware and translations. And I enjoyed the various spider characters as they drive their civilization forward, taking radical and not always popular steps to better deal with the extended period of dark when the star is in its dim phase. I like the subterfuge amongst the human factions, the gradually revealed secret evil plans of the smarmy Emergents, and the very slow burn plans of Pham and the others on the Cheng Ho side to regain control. Things build to a crescendo across three parallel story threads until they crash together with a bang at the end. A potential criticism might be that the slow burn was very slow in places, the reveals too small and piecemeal to be fully satisfying. If you enjoyed Tchaikovsky's Children of Time, there are obvious arachnid parallels here, to the point where I wonder if this book was an influence on Adrian. Last weekend, I also polished off Burning Chrome by William Gibson. This collection contains short stories, 10 of them, 3 of which are collaborations with other authors, John Shirley, Bruce Sterling and Michael Swanwick. This was my first William Gibson, and I enjoyed it. The stories straddle the publication date of Neuromancer, his 1984 debut novel. And it's worth remembering that personal computers were a rarity, with DOS only introduced in 1981, the same year that Johnny Mnemonic, the first story in the collection, was published. We barely even had green screen text interfaces. The internet wasn't yet a thing. Windows was still a twinkle in Bill Gates' eyes. And email didn't really even exist. There was no social media, no trolls, no nothing. And yet Gibson envisaged a world of cyber attacks, brain-computer interfaces, online communications, virtual reality, body hacks, and that's a remarkable leap of imagination. He certainly wasn't the first. There were other writers that envisaged an online future, but Gibson probably put the punk in cyberpunk. These are dark, seedy tales of the grimy underworld, threaded with noir sensibilities with added attitude and electronics. And I gather that 2 or 3 of the stories are set in the world that Gibson later created with the Sprawl trilogy. I particularly enjoyed the Molly Millions character from the first story and the heist story in the titular Burning Chrome, which bookend the collection. I really enjoyed my time here, and I will definitely be back for more Gibson soon. For the first of my July reads, I chose Fool's Dawn by Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough. And wow, this book is bleak as fuck. I think if you are a fan of Cormac McCarthy's The Road, then you will also like this book, and you should seek it out if you haven't already read it. In fact, they are a grimly fascinating double bill. In Fool's Dawn, the world has gone to rack and ruin, chiefly due to pollution and other man-made impacts. Society has broken down a decade or two before the story begins, and what's left are scattered groups of hardy survivors and marauding bands of pirates bent on rapine death and destruction as they scavenge for supplies. We have a pair of protagonists in this story. There's Thea and Evan, who pair up for a journey. I like that Thea is not some helpless, swooning female in need of protection. She can really handle herself. She's just as much a survivor with all that that entails to this point as Evan is. She is the victim, though, of a violent rape early in the book by a roving pirate, and this affects her developing relationship with Evan. They are travelling as a pair and they're seeking Gold Lake, where they believe a safe community exists. Again, as similarities to The Road with their journey towards the coast, believing that somehow safety exists. There's a similar kind of vibe. False Dawn tells the story of their journey, their many travails along the way, the descriptions of the ravaged and still deteriorating world, and the resulting mutations of animal, plant, and yes, human life are morbidly fascinating. Yarbrough's writing is taut as a drum, and the story moves along quickly, and it's done in 200 pages. It's a highly satisfying read from a quality point of view. If you've been paying attention, you'll know that I do like a good dose of apocalypse in my reading from time to time, and I'm very happy to have added False Dawn to my list of favourites. As I say, there are many parallels to The Road, and I wonder if McCarthy was at all influenced by False Dawn. I also read Daughter of Eden by Chris Beckett, which is the third instalment in the Eden trilogy. And this is set just a few years after the events of Book 2, Mother of Eden. The John folk across the water have gotten more warlike and are bent on invading the David folk territory. The main point of view character in this book is Angie, and she's the bat-faced friend of the beautiful Starlight, who was the protagonist in Book 2. We get flashbacks of Angie's time with Mary, a shadow speaker, sort of priest of a developing religion based on the supposed sayings and continued utterances of the long-dead Jella or Angela, the female ancestor of every person on the planet. Mary does the whole parlour trick of hearing Mary's voice, which of course only she can hear, and then conveying these messages to gullible people. And to be fair to her, to that she adds a good dose of compassion and empathy. In the present, Angie and her village are fleeing the invading forces, seeking refuge across the dark in Circle Valley, scene of most of Book 1, the original settlement on the site of the original landing. I really enjoyed being back in this world for the final time. The world building continues to be excellent. Beckett throws a massive spanner in the works later in the book by having a small contingent from Earth arrive out of the blue. This is meant, and that's not a spoiler, it's mentioned in the blurb on the cover. They present several obvious contradictions to received wisdom, to the varying dogma of every faction, and whilst everyone is amazed to see the research crew, things quickly go south when they start introducing facts into the belief systems. This series will be making its way into my top 10 sci-fi series whenever I get around to revisiting that list. I recommend. On audiobook, I also finished The Stars, My Destination by Alfred Bester. I've somehow managed to avoid reading this book in the last 40 years, but I finally got around to it this week. As most of you probably already know, this is a classic of science fiction. It's almost 70 years old at this point. Bester once again imagines a world in which humans have extraordinary abilities. In The Demolished Man, it was telepathy, and in this book, it's the ability to jaunt or to teleport by the power of the mind alone. Gullyfoyle is the protagonist, a fairly unlikable character, to be honest, initially full of low cunning and spite. The premise is that he was shipwrecked, stranded in space for months, barely surviving until rescue arrives, or does it, in the form of a passing ship, the Vorga. But no, Gully is left to die in space, and he swears revenge. The rest of the book is his search for the truth and a personal journey for him. I was struck by some similarities to A Flower for Algernon in that whilst Gully's raw intelligence doesn't change in the same way that Charlie's does, he does make increasingly smart use of it as the story progresses. For reasons that become obvious as you read it, he has to control his emotions to find better ways to extract information than brutal torture. He has to operate in high society. Gully is a hunted man, but not only because of the trail of rape and death that he leaves behind him in his search for the crew of the Vorga. Things are not as simple as Gully thought. An apparently straightforward tale of revenge becomes one of conspiracy spanning the entire solar system, involving secret weapons, the ultra-rich, more telepaths, and secret abilities that Gully doesn't even know he possesses. I enjoyed the way that the story develops. Hidden layers are revealed along the way, and I enjoyed the way that Gully gets a grip on his personality, just about. I didn't think much of the audio book presentation compared to some anyway. I didn't find the narrator engaging. It was pretty basic. I was excited to pick up Deep Wheel Orcadia by Harry Josephine Giles next. I'd heard really good things about it. And I was a little bit disappointed to find that it's super hard work. The text is in two sections. The top half is in the form of Orcadian verse. Orcadian is the local dialect of the Orkney Islands, which is off the coast of Scotland, which is where the author lives. And while some of those words are recognisable and I expect perseverance would be rewarded, who's got the time to do that heavy lifting? I'm reading for pleasure, not for a homework assignment. Fortunately, Giles provides a translation below. Fantastic, I can read that instead, I thought. Nope. It's chock full of compound words made of 3 or 4 or even 5 words, which I imagine was intended to give a richer sense of meaning. But personally, I was left scratching my head trying to figure out which of those compound words I should use to understand the meaning, or what the overall compound word might actually mean. And if that wasn't hard enough to manage, the structure of the paragraphs in this translation is also odd, with lines ending abruptly to be continued on the next, by which time I'd lost the thread of the sentence. I'm sure it's all terribly clever, and it did win the Arthur C. Clarke Award a couple of years back when it was published. For me, it's way too clever for its own good, failing to actually tell a story, which after all is sort of the point of the book. I got about a third of the way through, and I have absolutely no idea what the fuck is actually happening in this book. Perhaps I'm just too stupid, I don't think I am, or impatient, maybe, or insufficiently artsy-fartsy, but I didn't get on with it at all. So this book, or maybe it's a novella, is a hard nope for me. I'm out. It's a rare DNF. It's a shame. What have you been reading this week? Is there anything that you'd recommend? Do let us know in the comments down below. Channel stuff next then. Subscribers are at 2,937, which is up 22 on last week. And if you're one of those 22, or if you're a first-time viewer today, then a huge welcome to you. I'm John, and I focus on reading, collecting, and chatting about science fiction books, old and new. Comment of the week this week was from Graham Walker, a school friend of Adam Roberts, it turns out. He reminisces about Adam's quick wit and his sense of humour, but also bemoans his current moustache, which Graham feels resembles rather too closely that of Miss Grove, their Class 10 teacher. And that made me chuckle. Thanks, Graham, for taking the time to leave a comment. And as usual, thank you to everyone else that has done so. I read them all, and it's one of my favourite things about doing this channel. On the channel this week was another episode of Bookshelf Bingo, with the addition this time of the Dice of Destiny. Through a combination of fate and choice, I picked my TBR for July. I'm really excited by the resulting 12 books. More on that over the coming weeks. Yesterday evening saw a chat with Adam Roberts, one of the UK's most prolific and yet still under the radar science fiction writers. I really enjoyed our conversation. At 70 minutes, it's a pretty long video by my standards, so if you haven't watched it yet, I suggest you grab a cuppa and a premium snack and settle in. We cover all manner of topics, from his writing process to Christopher Priest, to the state of science fiction today, pan lozenges, his favourite books, H.G. Wells, black holes, his latest book, and what's coming next from him, and much, much more. What have I watched this week? I felt compelled to watch a very emotional video from Matt at Science Fiction Reads, a friend of this channel, who very sadly had joy turn to tragedy recently with the death of their baby after just a few days. It's very raw, heartbreaking stuff. I simply can't imagine what they're both going through, and I hope fervently that I never have to experience anything like that devastating. Matt, you and your partner continue to be in my thoughts, and I wish you the strength to get through this and the time and space that you need to grieve. I did watch a bunch of other things too, but I think we'll just leave it there for this week. In the bookbuying department, I have been doing a bit of online shopping. After speaking to Adam Roberts the other day, I've been seeking out a few Christopher Priest first editions. I was particularly pleased to find an excellent copy of The Gradual. Those haven't arrived yet, but with a modest haul from a charity shop last weekend, the to-be-hauled pile stands at a tally of 19 books. I will be in London tomorrow, and I might accidentally pop into a couple of bookshops, so I expect I will be adding to that total. Looking ahead to the coming week, on Sunday there will be a wrap-up of June's reading and a declaration of a book of the month, and later in the week I'll be taking a look back over the first half of this year. According to my records, I've read 72 books over that period, so we'll be covering the highs and lows of that lot, the hits and misses, the contenders for the book of the year, and a few stinkers too. Reading-wise, having taken an early bath on Deep Wheel Orcadia, I've made the executive decision to replace it in July's TBR roster with this novella by Adam Roberts, The Man Who Would Be King. On audiobook, I've picked up Kingdoms of Death, which is the 4th instalment of the Sun Eater series. I've skied a bit off-piste because that's not on my TBR pile for this month either. But I decided that I just don't want to wait until August to maybe possibly read it. I shall make gradual progress through that over the next couple of weeks whilst I'm out running or in the garden or whatever. And in physical book form, after the Roberts novella, I think I shall read A Case of Conscience, next. And after that, I'll see where the mood takes me, time allowing. As always, thank you for watching. Have a splendid weekend. And until next time, goodbye for now.